As we take a look at the season thus far through 12 rounds, you have to think, where would Charles Leclerc be compared to Max Verstappen if he didn't have all these different mistakes? If we look at the standings now, we look at the drivers' standings, you can see a huge difference in between Max Verstappen here and Charles Leclerc. 233 points to 170, with Sergio Perez right behind at 163. And in the teams, you could see Ferrari are almost 100 points behind. But you have to question, what would this look like if it was not how it is? As you can see, Leclerc has won 1, 2, 3 races this year. Carlos Sainz and Perez with 1, and then Verstappen with the other 7. But what would it be like if we went through every single race and really see what happened? Now, some of Leclerc's mistakes have been on himself, some have been on the car, some have been strategy, but it has not always been his fault, but it has also not always been Ferrari's fault. Like, for example, in France, it was Charles Leclerc's fault. But we will look at Leclerc and Verstappen, really compare, and it first starts off here at Bahrain. Now, as you can see, Leclerc won this race, but Verstappen was more than likely going to challenge for a victory here. If Verstappen did not have the engine blow up, we'll say he got second place, which would put him at 18 more points than he currently had now. But Leclerc did win the Bahrain Grand Prix. It was a great start to the year. Then in Saudi Arabia, you could have said that Sergio Perez would have won the race, but it was a safety car that kind of messed things up. But there will be no change here. Verstappen won that race. Remember, it came down to the end on that final turn right before the straight, and Verstappen held off Leclerc, so no change. Then in Australia, Charles Leclerc won the race, but Max Verstappen had another DNF. Where would Verstappen have finished? More than likely in third, behind Sergio Perez, so we're going to add 15 points. So thus far, Leclerc has not been hampered at all. There has been no issue with Leclerc. This is where things were looking good. Right at this point, Verstappen has 33 points less than what he really should have if he picked up a second and a third. And Leclerc has, won 2 out of 3 races. But things start to get bad for Ferrari one way or another, and it's either the car exploding or Leclerc making a mistake, and you can't do that if you want a world championship, which is what Charles Leclerc said after France. He said, it doesn't matter if you're performing at such a high level if you can't put it together. Then in Imola, Leclerc had a rough race. It was Carlos Sainz who actually DNF'd. We will leave no change here as well. Verstappen got the win. It was a 1-2. Lando got third. Nothing crazy here. This wasn't the greatest race by Leclerc. Same thing in Miami. Like I said, things haven't gone bad for Ferrari just yet. At this point, I believe they were still actually in the lead of both the drivers, or maybe not the drivers because of how Sainz was having issues. But at this point, I think Leclerc was either tied with Max or was just 1 or 2 points ahead or behind. But then after Miami, it starts to get bad for Ferrari. But still, at this point, Max is the one who's 33 points behind what he should have been. And Leclerc hasn't had anything that would change that. Then in Spain, we have the first DNF for Charles Leclerc and for Zhou Guanyu. Where would Leclerc finish in this race? We'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say second, could have been third, could have even been first. But the Red Bulls are just so fast in Spain. We'll give him second here, which would have him 18 points. That does not affect Max, though, because Max still would have got to 25. Then in Monaco, the first race that Charles Leclerc actually finished in Monaco. No change here. I guess you could swap Leclerc and Verstappen, which I guess is what we'll do just to make it a bit more interesting, because Leclerc was leading this race, of course, before the strategy of Ferrari kind of messed things up. He probably should have finished ahead of Verstappen here with the way that things were going. So we'll swap the two. We'll add 3 more to Leclerc. which puts him at positive 21, and we'll take the 3 points away there from Max, which has him at 30. So both drivers would actually have a lot more points than what they currently do. Then in Azerbaijan, it was just a terrible week for Ferrari. They had the Haas of Kevin Magnussen, the Alpha of Zhou, both Ferraris. It was not good on the engine side of things. Leclerc, once again, will give him second here, finishing ahead of Sergio Perez. But Leclerc was actually, in contention for the win. It was different strategy, but we'll give him the 18 here, which puts him at positive 39. Then we had Canada, where Max Verstappen won the race. It was a DNF for Perez, Schumacher, and Yuki Tsunoda, and it just wasn't a great race for Leclerc. He finished in 5th. No change here. You could put him ahead of both the Mercedes, but there was nothing in this race that caused Leclerc to finish 5th besides just not being there that weekend. Then we had the British Grand Prix, where we saw Carlos Sainz get his first win. This one's kind of hard to tell because obviously we could give points here to Max Verstappen, who would have won this race more than likely, if we want to give Verstappen all those points, because he ran into Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly's the wing. Leclerc, he could have also, finished a bit higher. He was in the battle. He was right behind the Sainz at the start. But what happened here was, of course, with the hard tire, they didn't pit Leclerc. I'm just going to kind of leave this alone because, yes, Leclerc could have won this race if they pit him, which is what they should have done. But also Verstappen should have won this race if he didn't run over the Alpha Tauri. So I'm just going to leave it as is. We could say, sure, positive 13 for Leclerc, but we could also say the same for Verstappen and say positive 19. So I'm just going to leave it as is to avoid any confusion. Then in Austria, it was Leclerc first, Verstappen second. No change there. It's a great race. And then we get to France, which is obviously what just happened. And for some reason, it will not show up for me. And then we get to France, where Max Verstappen got the win, and Charles Leclerc, of course, DNF'd. This one's hard to tell because of the different strategies, but for the purpose of the video, we will say Leclerc will win. The Ferraris look faster the whole entire weekend. Sainz was battling Perez. Leclerc was winning the race, had a decent lead, but also Verstappen went for a different strategy. And if Leclerc didn't crash out, what would have happened? But what we'll do here is we'll give the 25 points to Leclerc, but we also aren't going to take away the 7 points for Verstappen to get second place, because it would have been hard to tell really who won the race. So what this leaves us is that Max Verstappen has 30 less points than what he should have. So basically, at this point, Max Verstappen should have 263 points at this moment. Leclerc should have 234. So if everything went to plan, it should be 234 for Leclerc and 263 for Verstappen, which of course is the likes of one race. It's 20 points. And the constructors' standings would be a difference of 60 instead of what it is now at almost 90. So that's, of course, what could have happened, but you could say so many different things about what could have or what couldn't have happened. But I think that's just an interesting way to look at it, really, just to see, if things happen differently, but the way that they should have, without reliability or some driver issue, there would only be a 20-point difference. And I think that's exactly what Leclerc was saying, where it's like, you're driving to such a great performance, but you're not getting the points. And it is true. It's a long shot now for Leclerc to win the championship, when if things went his way, it would be the matter of one race changing everything.